Hello and welcome to the Road to Success. I'm here with Larry Eason, who's with the Richmond Animal League. So, which I will tell you, I am a soft spot for rescue, for any kind of rescue association. I have two rescue dogs. I've had plenty in my past, so I'm very excited for this conversation. Larry, thank you so much for joining us today.
Super happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation, Sarah.
So, Larry, I know my instinct is I want to talk to you about all the animals that you have, but that's not why we're here today.
Yeah,
I know that when we first spoke, you talked a lot about the importance of sharing vision with staff and the importance of how that shared vision helps achieve strategic goals. Could you elaborate a little bit here based on your current experience and past experience for people who are in small businesses and nonprofits who are coming into an established organization, how to set that vision and then how to share it?
sure. Um, I I'll provide just a little bit of background on how I came here because it's relevant to the approach that I took here at Richmond Animal League, and it's going to vary to some extent for folks. But I have 40 years plus in nonprofit social impact experience, but I'd never worked in a shelter before. We're a big animal rescue, kind of like you, big animal rescue family. And so, I was brought on and hired because of that background and sort of the challenges and opportunities that existed here were things that mapped really well to my background and experience. I came in honestly super in listening mode. And for the first many months, I was really just sitting down with stakeholders across the organization to understand, basically what we did, how we did it, what was working, what wasn't working, and just get a sense of the organization and kind of where it felt like things were going. And I really didn't try early on at all to put a stamp. People would constantly say, "What's your vision? Where do you want to take this?" And I'm like, well, the strength that I have is helping, organizations figure out where they're trying to go and then building the team, et cetera, to get there. And obviously over time, I put my stamp on things because I've got that strategic background. But so that's the first thing is I think how you approach it really depends on, how you come into an organization and kind of what experience and expertise, you're bringing to it. But honestly, especially I think in the nonprofit sector, having a really clear North Star and a really clear vision of what you're trying to accomplish in the organization is critical, not just to like be able to get to where you're going, but everything from just managing the staff and kind of dealing with compassion fatigue, here in our sector, et cetera. It's just really not enough to say, for a person to feel like I do good work. That might be okay if, on the days that are going swimmingly, but on the days that are really rough and a struggle, you need to lean into something much deeper than that. And so, as quickly as possible, we got into a process here where we developed a strategic plan and a really clear and very ambitious vision, to play a critical role in solving the problem. And then, I just incorporate that into literally, almost every conversation that I have. I'll say one more thing and just let you follow up if you have any questions about it. But just, I think in the nonprofit sector, a lot of people just feel like, well, we all care, we're all on board. We don't need to talk about the why. We're just all aligned. And that's just an enormous mistake. Organizations and people within organizations need to continually talk about why they're doing what they're doing and where they're trying to go as an organization, both for themselves, even at the most senior level, but also for the rest of the organization as you're trying to, bring people along. So, I'll stop there, but I think it's absolutely essential to have a really clear and I think ideally a very ambitious vision for your organization.
Building off of what you've said and kind of putting a little bit of my experience in there as well, I would say that when you're continually talking about that vision and referring back to that vision, it does two things. It removes the silos or it breaks down the silos within organizations because sometimes different departments don't see the value in working together or communicating, but it also helps you really understand. I'm sure you have a better way of saying this, but the lane that you're in. Because so often in nonprofits, we are compassionate, right? We do that work because we care. So we
Yeah.
want to help everybody and everything. But we have to understand we've got to stay within that lane of what our mission is. We can't just jump around and do 1,500 different things. And so I think constantly talking about that vision helps us stay focused on what our work is. And then what I always tell people is as you see new problems come up, if they don't fit within your mission, look at your partner agencies, look at the other nonprofits that you know. Can you make a warm introduction? Can you hand off a warm handoff on this problem or partner together on it? And something that you said that I really want to stress, and you started it with this, is you started off by asking great questions and listening. And I think so often people don't understand that great questions and listening are two of the most powerful actions that you can have in any organization.
Yeah. No, I think I mean, on both of those things, I totally agree with you. And you've like raised or looked it up. I think one of the most important values of having a clear vision and honestly strategic plan and strategic priorities, which is it does enable you to say no more effectively, more graciously, because it's not just like, no, it's not a fit, or I don't think it's a fit, or whatever. You can really step back and say, well, let's look at what we're trying to accomplish here. We're trying to, increase our life-saving capacity, and this kind of fits into that. But is it a fit? Is there somebody else out there that could do this better, or is it scalable? We have programs here that are small and ad hoc. They're really not moving the needle, and the problem is much larger. And so instead of continuing to invest in those, let's look and figure out how do we create a scalable, program that's going to actually address the full scale of the need. So I couldn't, I think you're dead on that. Yes, I agree.
So, I just want to stress, if you don't hear anything in this podcast, but those first 3 minutes, I would say what you just shared, Larry, is like the biggest gold nugget. Maybe it's bigger than a gold drop at a profit or somebody coming into a nonprofit. And I would argue also small business can really hear. So you mentioned this earlier a little bit with compassion fatigue, and just to be really honest and completely transparent, I have suffered from compassion fatigue. It is a real thing. And if you don't address it head on, if you aren't honest with yourself, for me, I ran the risk of becoming jaded and changing from the person I wanted to be. So compassion fatigue is very real. So talking about that and the visions and getting everybody in alignment, here's my next question for you. So often in nonprofits, the staff can feel isolated from the board and the mission. What is your secret to closing that gap? How do you get the board involved, but not in an over detailed way, and also the staff to feel like they can also be on board with the board?
Yeah. And that's, I mean, such a huge challenge with many organizations, and was definitely an issue here, at RAL. And we also have a third, sort of weather system here, which is our volunteers. We have hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, right, that are also, and so they're those three potential silos, and the volunteers not understanding what the staff are doing in the roles and all that. And that's a little bit easier, but certainly the board and the staff not understanding the board, et cetera. So, I mean, I think that some of this is a little obvious, and so I apologize in advance, but I just kind of have to say it. I mean, the staff needs to understand what the board does. So I do spend a lot of time with, especially starting with the leadership, but also the rest of the organization, just not only talking about the board, but also just, lifting it up and just say, because we have a number of assets. Like my rap about RAL includes like, well, we've got these 5 assets. We have an amazing board, and I riff on that, and we've got this great staff and all these volunteers and deep goodwill, so I have that list, but the board is on that list. And with the staff, I just talk about like they're focused on the right things. They're very strategic, and they're really ambitious. Like before I even got here, they had already made some of the key decisions that helped, us to have successes in the early, in some of the early time here. So I think part of it is just, just talking about what the board does and what its role is. We do have the advantage here that a lot of board members volunteer at RAL. But even then, a lot of the staff and the volunteers don't even realize those are board members. So, what are the things that we can do to make sure that that's clear? The other thing that I do to try to break down those silos and sort of demystify a little bit is that, for the board meetings, I do a consent agenda, which is essentially a really deep update since the last board meeting. And I basically take that consent agenda and I use that as a template for doing an update for the staff. And the staff knows that. So the staff doesn't, so they get an update from me right before our staff meetings, and we do some Q&A during the staff meeting. But they get a deep dive that they know is basically what I presented to the board, and it helps them to feel like we're not having some separate conversation over here than we're having, over here. And obviously there is some of that, and they know that, but I think that's really helpful as well. A couple other things, we do. Obviously, the senior leadership team, gets invited to participate. We don't have all the staff come to board meetings. It's just given the size of the organization and what everyone's trying to accomplish, it doesn't really make sense. But, there's always a staff person there, in addition to me and the development director, presenting and talking about what we do or talking about their department. And we've started to include mid-level managers too, to come and present with some of their expertise. And I think that's helpful. And then sometimes when it feels appropriate to the topics, we invite a board member to come join, part of the staff meeting. We do day long. When I first got here, people we hate staff meetings. They were like an hour, once a month. And we want to can you just stop doing them? And I said, nope, we're going to do day long staff meetings. But they're 3 times a year and they're an event. I mean, we really just, it's like enough time to really for folks to get to know each other and to do a real icebreaker, to work on some real skills and wrestle through stuff together, et cetera. And then we spend the last part of the afternoon going out and doing something fun. We're going to do whitewater rafting in a couple of weeks after our next. So we've done bowling and portrait painting of your pet and, a bunch of roller skating. That was the one that unnerved me a little bit. No one got injured, so that was awesome. But we do some fun thing that we try to pick where it'll be cross-departmental. And anyway, I'll stop.
No, I love this. I pulled out so many nuggets from things you said, and I've learned things. So the biggest takeaway that I'm taking here is that you take and do, I'm just going to use my terminology to make it simple as I explained it. You basically take your board report and your notes from the board meeting and create a staff report that you share prior to the staff meeting that they have time to review and digest. And then you give them an opportunity to ask questions. And I have to say, I think that's brilliant because that just it streamlines communication, but 2, it really creates that openness and that clarity that you have an open door policy, you're transparent, and you're going to say what's going on. And that for me is one of the biggest things I'm taking away. I will say when I had a bigger team, I did the all-day staff meetings like you and always worked in something fun. And that's where that true bonding came in, because so often, especially since the pandemic, I don't know if you found this, seems like people come to work and they're checked out and just, I'm here, it's harder to build relationships, but you need that relationship at work, especially with the work you guys are doing, because I imagine it could be a little bit more emotionally taxing with some of the cases that you get.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Communications is, it's almost like 80% of my job. I mean, I think people are surprised by how much time I spend. I do a weekly update for the staff that's, focused strategic. It's we use a system, we use Axios HQ. I don't know if you follow Axios, and they're a news organization. And they've developed a platform and it helps you to basically organize your newsletters. So I do a weekly, kind of organizational update for the staff, and then every month. So today's the last Monday of the month. So I'll send one out to volunteers today, and that goes out to a couple thousand, people. And just as examples, it's a serious time commitment. But again, the updates for the board, the updates for the staff, I do and then just tons of one-on-one in-person meetings. So the communications component of the role of executive director, I think, is just an enormous part of what we do.
I agree. I've always said that it should be your executive director, the majority of their time should be spent in relationship building. And that has to be divided between internal and external, but you
Yep.
should rarely see them in their office working because they should be out there speaking and talking and doing
Right.
things. And those are the ones that move things. So, as you in your history have come into new organizations, this is something I really am excited to hear your answer to. What is your secret to overcoming pessimism and that hold on to the old ways of doing things? Like when people will say that this is how we've always done it. How do you respond that and turn that into a positive?
That that's a challenge, at almost any organization. It's certainly one that we had here. I think there's a few things that come to mind. One is no one wants to hear you talk about how things can change. They want to see things actually change. And so, a big part of it is actually picking a few things that will be. I mean, we've already talked about the listening part because that has to come first. You have to understand the organization and its struggles, and pretty deeply. But from my perspective, like pretty quickly, I tried to figure out like what were things that were going to move the needle to increase the impact of the organization, to increase the team's ability to work, sort of across the team.
Mhm.
And so people were feeling collectively like we were doing something impactful together, and then just also improving the lives of staff members. And again, there were some things in motion like increasing pay and enhancing some of the benefits, et cetera, before I even got here. But just making sure that people have the tools that they need. But honestly, it's like actually moving the needle on some things. But then it's just relentlessly being optimistic, and just and just talking with people about the fact that that things can change, are changing, and I map back to the strategic plan as well, because I think that's an important component. Even before we had a strategic plan and sort of clear, now we have a really clear vision and really clear strategic
Mhm.
priorities. But even before that, I figured out a way to talk about what the organization was wanting to do, that helped people to feel like there was something bigger going on here, rather than just sort of the day-to-day struggles. And then eventually, it's like not everyone is going to get on board. And so, over time, folks who are excited about what you're doing and want to be a part of where the organization is going, those folks will stay. And people who, really are looking for something else, don't stay, whether they decide to leave or the organization decides it's not a fit or whatever. But that over time, that happens as well.
It's kind of like that John Gordon bus, the energy bus. Those who are, want to energetic stay on the bus, and the energy vampires, they tend to exit. And it's just that optimism that really pushes that forward. So
And
something I kind
can
of
I just
briefly,
can I just
yes,
add one thing, Sarah, which is,
yeah,
often we're not doing people a favor keeping them, at an organization when they're not happy and it's not healthy for them or the organization. And there are definitely examples of folks who are unhappy here, but who have gone off and into a new position, and they're thriving. And that's great. We're, super excited for them. It's a pretty small field. And so we all kind of work together. And I do want to mention that it's actually often it's like the case where it really isn't a fit, and somebody, can find the right role, get into that role, and all of a sudden, they're making a bigger difference and enjoying their day to day and contributing more. And I just thought that was worth sharing.
oh no, I agree, and I love how you put that positive spin on it. Right, it's not about pushing people out; it's about helping people find the right fit for them. And I think that's the true thing with leadership: is understanding people's strengths and helping them find the right role, helping investing in them until they find that right role. And then it's always you want them to go on and do bigger and better, and that's the positive thing that we all
Yeah.
work in.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mentioned this briefly about the removing the silos, but what is your tip, your number one way that you remove silos within and outside of your organization?
Um, I mean, I think a big part of removing silos, honestly, is modeling, like, not coming across like you know everything yourself. Um, and then having and working with the leadership team to have the leadership team, bring that mindedness and almost like child mind to problems and challenges, because that helps then the rest of the team understand that we all have something to learn from one another. We can fertilize the organization, do cross training, et cetera. I mean, honestly, I think I kind of starts from that. And then, it's like doing these staff meetings where we have enough time for people to actually get to know each other and organize things that people are not just in their departmental cliques, but actually getting to know and work with, folks across the organization. The updates, so that people are updated on what's happening in other parts of the organization. I mean, there's a lot to it, but also a big part of it is just not really allowing those islands to concretize. One of the most effective ways of building loyalty and building a team is us versus them. But it's also it's very effective, but it's incredibly corrosive. And so it undermines the goals of the overall organization, even if it helps you to build, your department. And so when you see that happening, kind of jumping in, intervening, and suggesting other paths, disrupting that. But again, a lot of it is just it's communication. It's got to be a commitment across the leadership team. Some of it is people not being critical of the teams of their colleagues. That's really frowned on here. It's like criticizing and sniping at other people's teams, et cetera. So there's a lot that goes into it. That was a little bit of a shotgun answer, but hopefully helpful.
No, I think that's good. It's very good. Okay. How do you reinstill hope into a team that has lived through multiple leaders?
Honestly, it kind of goes back to an earlier question. I really think hope comes from believing that change is possible. And honestly, here, I think one of the things I'm most excited about. I mean, I'm so grateful to be here. I feel like I was kind of set up for success. The organization has a lot going for it, and we truly do have an exceptional staff, an exceptional board. The volunteers are amazing. There's just so much that we have, and so I inherited a lot of goodness. And so just helping people to see not only like a lot of organizations, we were kind of cruising along and COVID hit and things really, in terms of our numbers and our pets, all kinds of reasons, good reasons, whatever. We just weren't transferring in and adopting out as many. We weren't doing all the spay neuters that we typically, did in the clinic, et cetera. And so there was this real focus on like getting back up to where we were pre-pandemic. And that was like the bar. And so when we were moving forward on that, and right before I got here, it was like, how come it's taking so long, to get back up to that? And I think the thing that's most energizing to me is that that's no longer the standard. It's not about getting back, because even getting back up to that, it's not going to solve the problem. And, I want to, we don't want to be doing the same work 40 years from now. We want to solve the problem and move on to something else or something higher order. And so the thing I think I'm most proud as a team that we have accomplished is sort of raising the sense of what's possible here. And we're really, our strategic plan is focused on trying to solve the problem in our lifetime, like accelerate the region to all cats and dogs in a loving home with access to the support they need to thrive. That's our new vision. And we won't do that alone, but we can be an accelerant, like we can get there in 15 years instead of 40. And honestly, hope comes from having something ambitious to be shooting for, and then believing that it's possible because you see progress, towards that goal. And so that's, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of conversations one-on-one, just again, relentless communication, relentless optimism, but then, providing people really tangible signs of progress, towards this larger goal that you're working towards.
In this position, What has been your greatest challenge?
Um, so I missed something. So I've been here 3.5 years, maybe a little bit longer than that. And about a year and a half in, or year and a quarter, or whatever it was, but things are going, my whole thing with the board has been like slow, steady, even if it felt like things were going well or whatever, it's like slow, steady progress. This is a marathon, not a sprint, sustainable progress. And we were doing well, and we were doing month to month and quarter to quarter. It felt like we were building momentum, and there was, I was feeling good, the board was feeling good, the staff was feeling, it was positive. And I made the mistake at that point in time, and in not engaging with the leadership team, and probably the board too, but it would have really come out with the leadership team and some other key team members to just say, what's a vulnerability? Like, what could go wrong here? And if I had done that, I'm not going to get into the details because it's kind of a sensitive topic,
Right.
but I will just say that something that, I could have anticipated. And if I had done that sort of, risk assessment and said, what's a vulnerability here, would have identified that there was an issue here where there were strongly divergent opinions, about that issue. And we could have had some conversations before something occurred, it probably wouldn't have removed the controversy, but it would have shortened the length of time and the overall depth of the impact on the organization. And so it was really the greatest challenge was kind of a missed thing on my part. I was really focused on and wanting to double down and put energy into the fact that things were going well. Let's just keep the momentum. And that would have been a really, now I'm doing that all the time. Like, okay, pause, take a look, talk with this team, like what's a vulnerability? So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that definitely, was the beginning. It was a mistake on my part that led to, the largest challenge that I've had here at the organization. But hopefully also a little bit of a suggestion on how to avoid it.
So one thing I would like to say very respectfully is I wouldn't call it a mistake. I would call it a learning opportunity, a growing opportunity, right? Um, I was reading the other day about leadership. I read all these little tidbits all day long. And it was, let me see if I can say it back to you. It was about being a pragmatic optimist. So, like you said, we have to be optimistic and we have to see the good in situations, but we also have to be able to see those risks and walk down that path of what is the worst case scenario. And so I think being a leader, it's having that balance and being able to do that risk assessment in a positive way, and having, I always say, plans A through Z, right? Of how, and being able, so that you can pivot and adapt more quickly. But I would like to say, while what I am saying sounds wonderfully easy to do, as you said, there's always going to be controversy and there's always going to be emotions. It's learning how to manage those in an effective way where there's healing involved and where it doesn't turn into longer. But it's hard to do. It's
Yeah.
really hard to do. And
Yeah.
when you're in the thick of things, it's hard to see everything. I think it's so much easier to look back and say, oh, I should have done this. And
Yeah.
that's that leading with grace then too.
Yeah.
So I
Although
think you go
I
ahead.
just I agree with you 100%. And the only thing, the friendly amendment to what you just shared was I recognized really quickly that I had made that mistake, and I started talking about that really early on, um, and saying, and acknowledging that error on my part, that missed opportunity on my part, so that wasn't coming into these meetings saying, you screwed that, this, your team is messing this up, or your team is. I was able
Right.
to come in and say, here's the mistake that I made, and what I'm working on to correct that. And let's work together, to heal and all of that. But I think it's really helpful as a leader to acknowledge, it's a vulnerable thing, right? But you just
Yes.
acknowledge the mistakes that you make. And, I say frequently, to the board, to the staff, I make mistakes all the time. I'm going to make
Right.
mistakes. So anyway, I just, the friendly amendment, that I
Yes.
caught pretty early on and then incorporated into the solution.
Right.
And I think it helped.
I agree so much. I think that vulnerability as a leader and that humility as a leader is what builds those relationships and what helps you move past anything, because they see you as a real person. They see that you're willing to admit your mistake. And I think that's how I've always led. And that's even how I've parented, right? Where I would sit down and say to my daughter, here's how I messed up and here's what I'm doing to correct it. So hearing you echo those words, I can tell you it works in every facet of your life, every kind of relationship. So we're winding down. And so I'm going to ask the final question.
Sure.
What is the piece of advice that you would give to somebody who is just starting out as a leader?
Just starting out as a leader. I think, for me, I made the mistake, really early on, of trying to be, um, uh, to be something that I wasn't, instead of leaning into the things that were unique about me. Um, and so, the process over, I don't know, 15, 20 years, those early years when I was, kind of getting more responsibility and asked to take on more leadership, was the process of sort of undoing, that and some of the damage that was created by that. And so, there's no substitute for, just being yourself and being authentic. And I know it feels so hackneyed to say those things, but honestly, it's really true. And, for me, it's just, I know that I have all kinds of weaknesses. I acknowledge that. I have certain strengths, and I acknowledge that. I talk a lot about, why I'm doing what I'm doing, where we're trying to take the organization. And I just think learning how to do those things, is just super valuable. I guess the other thing, it's like a whole nother, sort of podcast topic, but we don't have time for it. But it's also just, build your network of professional relationships, and do that cross sector super broadly, and not like just within your area of expertise. And within, there's just really good data out there on the fact that the best new connections, the best new opportunities, the best new ideas and resources come from outside of your strong ties. They come from your weak ties, because the people, the 8, 10, 15 people that you surround yourself with, you're all kind of exposed to the same information and seeing the same
Right.
thing. Whereas the new thing, the good stuff comes in from outside of that. And today we have tools like LinkedIn and other digital tools that enable you to just, stay connected. Your Rolodex is just updated for you. You can see what people are thinking about. You can see who they know. The power of your network today compared to when I first started, 40 plus years ago, it's like 100-fold. So, I would definitely, if you're, any new leaders starting out, just get to know the people, that work closely with, start those relationships and stay connected. Because especially if you're a young leader, like the people that you're working with who are, like early in their careers, 30 years from
Mhm.
now, they'll be running the country and running the big organizations and, et cetera. And somebody told me that 40 years ago, and I thought they were just buttering us up, but that's actually true now when I look
Yeah.
around me. So anyway, but those are my thoughts.
Larry, you shared so many nuggets here. And I think that if we really sat down and looked at this podcast, we could come up with 15 more topics that you started here. And they were really true gold nuggets. And I appreciate your time. And I would just say, you're so lucky, because on a bad day, you get to scratch dog's ear at work. So that always adds to goodness. So thank you for your time. I appreciate
Yeah.
it. And if there's anything I can ever do, because as you said, those networks are so vital, please don't hesitate to reach out.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Sarah. And thanks
Great.
for reaching out
Thank
and doing this. It's been a real pleasure.
It has. Thank you, Larry. Bye.
Bye-bye.